Tade wiped the sweat off his forehead as he packed his tools into his bag. It had been a long day at work, and all he could think about was getting home to rest. The evening sky was turning orange, and the cool breeze felt refreshing on his tired face. Just as he stepped out of the workshop, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was his wife, Funmi. "Honey, please come quickly." His wife, Funmi, her voice was shaky, almost in tears. "It's Deji. He's having another seizure. I don't know what to do." Tade's heart dropped. Deji, his 7-year-old son, had epilepsy. Every time he had a seizure, it was terrifying for the family. Tade had seen it before, but it never got easier. "I'm on my way, Funmi," Tade said, his voice firm but filled with worry. He hung up and hurried to his old, worn-out car. He had to get to the house as fast as he could. As Tade drove through the busy streets, his mind raced. He prayed silently, asking God to protect my son. The roads were crowded and the evening traffic didn't make things easier. "God, please let him be okay," Tade whispered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Suddenly, the headlights of an oncoming truck blinded him. The truck swerved wildly, heading straight toward his car. Tade's hands moved quickly, turning the steering wheel to avoid the collision. But it was too late. The sound of metal crashing into metal was deafening. Tade felt his car spin out of control before everything went black. When Tade opened his eyes, he couldn't see clearly. Everything was blurry and his body felt heavy, like he was underwater. He tried to move, but pain shot through his arms and legs. "Where am I?" he thought, panic setting in. He could hear faint voices around him, people shouting and car horns blaring in the distance. His head pounded as he slipped in and out of consciousness. All he could think about was Funmi and Deji. Did I make it to them? But the darkness swallowed him again before he could answer his own question. Tade's world remained dark and quiet as he lay unconscious. His mind wandered to memories of happier days, laughing with Funmi, playing with Deji, and dreaming of a better future for their family. Funmi sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she stared at her phone. The night crept in, and the darkness outside mirrored the fear in her heart. She dialed Tade's number again for the 5th time that hour, but it went straight to voicemail. "Tade, please pick up," she whispered, her voice cracking. She tried his boss next. "Yes, he left in a hurry," his boss confirmed. "He said it was an emergency at home. That was hours ago. Is everything okay?" Funmi hung up without answering. Her mind raced with worry. Tade wasn't the type to leave her in the dark. She barely noticed the tears streaming down her face as she paced back and forth. Deji, now asleep, was being watched by a kind neighbour, but Funmi couldn't focus on anything except the knot of dread in her chest. It was early morning when Funmi's phone finally buzzed. She scrambled to pick it up, nearly dropping it in her haste. The caller ID was unfamiliar. "Hello?" she answered anxiously. "Hello. Is this Mrs. Funmi Adewale?" the voice asked. "Yes, who's speaking?" she said, her heart pounding. "This is Dr. Bello from General Hospital. Your husband, Mr. Tade Adewale, was brought in last night after a serious car accident. We found your number as the last person he called. He's in critical condition and requires surgery immediately." Funmi's breath caught. The world around her seemed to spin. Is he alive?" she stammered. "He is, but barely. Please come to the hospital as soon as you can," the doctor replied. Funmi dropped the phone and bolted out of the house, forgetting even to grab her purse. Tears blurred her vision as she ran across the compound to the neighbour's house. "Please watch Deji for me," she begged. "It's an emergency. I'll be back soon." The neighbour, alarmed by Funmi's pale face, nodded. "Go. Don't worry about him." Funmi rushed to the street, waving down a passing motorbike. As the bike sped toward the hospital, she prayed aloud, her voice trembling. "God, please don't let me lose him. Please, Deji still needs his father." At the hospital, Funmi found Dr. Bello waiting for her. The news was grim. Tade had suffered multiple fractures and internal bleeding. He needed surgery immediately, but the costs were steep. Funmi's first instinct was to call her siblings. "Tade is in critical condition," she explained to her elder sister. "We need money for his surgery. Please, anything you can give. I'm sorry, Funmi, her sister replied hesitantly. Things are tight right now. I wish I could help. Disheartened, Funmi tried another sibling, but the response was the same. Some, however, were genuinely shocked. Tade? An accident? My God! Her younger brother exclaimed. I'll send what I can right away. The hours crawled by as Funmi scrambled to raise funds. She called family, friends, and even her church members, praying someone would step in. Back at home, Deji was playing with the neighbours' children, unaware of the chaos unfolding. But when he saw his mother return, dishevelled and crying, he ran to her. Mummy, what happened? He asked, his small voice trembling. Funmi scooped him into her arms, holding him tightly. It's okay, my love, she said, her voice breaking. Daddy is hurt, but he'll be fine. Just pray for him, okay? Deji nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. Together they knelt in the corner of the living room, praying fervently. Funmi stared at the small tin box she had tucked away in the back of her wardrobe. Inside was the money she had been painstakingly saving for Christmas. A modest sum meant to buy rice, oil, and small gifts for Deji and Tade. Her hands trembled as she opened it, counting the crisp notes one by one. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. This will barely scratch the surface, she muttered, tears stinging her eyes. Later that evening, her friend Ngozi came by, her face lined with concern. Funmi poured out her heart, explaining her desperate attempts to gather funds for Tade's surgery. Ngozi listened, nodding thoughtfully. Funmi, there's one option you haven't considered, Ngozi said hesitantly, breaking the silence. Funmi looked up, her eyes weary. What option? I've tried everything. Your father, Ngozi said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's wealthy, and he could help. You need to go to him. Funmi recoiled at the suggestion, shaking her head vehemently. I can't, Ngozi. You know what happened. He disowned me when I got pregnant with Deji. He'd never help me. But he's your father, Ngozi pressed gently, and this is life or death. Tade needs you to do whatever it takes. Think about Deji too. He can't lose his father. Funmi turned away, her thoughts spiraling. Memories of her father flooded her mind, the proud, stern man who had sold everything to send her to law school, hoping she would elevate their family's status. The man who had called her his golden girl, until she ran away after getting pregnant. Her mother had been the bridge between them, trying to soothe her father's anger, but when she passed away, that bridge collapsed. Funmi was left with nothing but her father's bitterness and her siblings' resentment. Her younger sister, Ronke, had borne the brunt of their father's decision to stop investing in his daughters. She had never forgiven Funmi for ruining their father's trust in training female children. Funmi could still hear Ronke's cutting words, full of scorn and blame. You're the reason Baba doesn't believe in us. You wasted everything he gave you and we're paying for it. Now, facing the reality of Tade's condition, Funmi knew Ngozi was right. Her father was her only chance. But the thought of seeing him again filled her with dread. Would he even speak to her? Or would he slam the door in her face, leaving her to fend for herself, as he had for years? Funmi, Ngozi said, breaking her thoughts. You can't let pride or fear stop you. This is bigger than you. Go to him and beg if you have to. Funmi nodded slowly, her heart heavy. That night, after putting Deji to bed, she sat on the edge of her couch, staring at her phone. With shaking hands, she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. Who is this? She swallowed the lump in her throat. Baba. It's Funmi. There was silence on the other end, so thick it felt suffocating. What do you want? He finally said, his voice cold. Tears rolled down Funmi's cheeks as she tried to explain. Baba, Tade is in the hospital. He needs surgery, and I don't have the money. Please, help us. Her father's bitter laugh sent a chill through her. Help? You want my help now? After all these years? After what you did? Funmi's sobs grew uncontrollable. Baba, please. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you, but Tade is a good man, and Deji is your grandson. Don't punish them for my mistakes." Another long pause. "I have no grandson," he said, his voice laced with anger. "I told your mother that when you left. You made your choice, Funmi. Now live with it." The line went dead, and Funmi felt as though the world had collapsed around her. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing into the night. But as she sat there, a new resolve began to form. If her father wouldn't help, she would find another way. She wouldn't let Tade die, and she wouldn't let Deji grow up without his father. Funmi wiped her tears, knowing she had no choice but to fight harder. In the dim glow of the night, she whispered a prayer. "God, you're my only hope now. Please show me the way." The days that followed were grueling for Funmi. With Tade still in the hospital, Deji's schooling became a distant concern. The school fees had gone unpaid for months, and the principal finally sent a letter asking her to withdraw Deji until the fees were settled. Funmi felt like a failure as she explained to her son that he couldn't go to school anymore. Deji, wise beyond his years, tried to comfort her. "It's okay, Mummy," he said with a brave smile. "I'll stay home and help you." But his words only deepened her guilt. He was just a child, yet the weight of their struggles was falling on his small shoulders. Ngozi, her ever-loyal friend, stopped by regularly, bringing food and small gifts for Deji. She often found Funmi staring blankly at the wall, the burden of her circumstances heavy on her face. "You need to eat, Funmi," Ngozi urged, setting down a basket of yam and vegetables. "You can't keep going like this." Funmi managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Ngozi. I don't know what I'd do without you." But even with Ngozi's support, Funmi knew it wasn't enough. She started taking on minor jobs, cleaning houses, doing laundry, and running errands for people in the neighborhood. The work was exhausting, and the pay barely covered their meals, let alone Tade's medical bills. Tade's condition, meanwhile, grew worse. The doctors warned that without the surgery, he might not survive. Funmi spent sleepless nights by his bedside, watching his chest rise and fall, her heart breaking with each laboured breath he took. She begged her siblings again, but they either ignored her calls or made excuses. The church members who had once offered help were now silent, their initial generosity replaced with apathy. One evening, Deji found his mother sitting in the corner of their small living room, clutching a picture of Tade. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the photo. Deji crawled into her lap, wrapping his small arms around her. "Mummy, don't cry," he said softly. "Daddy will get better. God will help us." His innocent faith brought a fresh wave of tears. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, holding him close. "I wish I could be as strong as you." That Sunday, Funmi went to church with Deji. She knelt at the altar holding Tade's picture close to her chest. Her voice broke as she cried out to God, pouring her heart into her prayers. The congregation watched silently, their faces a mix of pity and discomfort. Some offered words of encouragement, but most turned away, their sympathy running dry. That night, as Funmi prepared for bed, Deji suddenly screamed from his room. She rushed in to find him convulsing on the floor. Panic surged through her as she tried to hold him still, praying with every fibre of her being for the seizure to stop. "Please, God, don't take him too. I can't lose both of them," she cried, her voice shaking. The episode lasted longer than usual, leaving Deji weak and pale. Funmi held him in her arms, rocking him back and forth as she whispered reassurances. But deep down, her spirit was broken. The weight of her struggles seemed unbearable, and the fear of losing both her husband and her son consumed her. That night, as Deji slept fitfully beside her, Funmi lay awake, her mind racing. She knew she was at the end of her strength. With no one else to turn to, she whispered a final desperate plea into the darkness. "God, if you're there, if you hear me, please help us. Show me what to do. I can't do this alone." She fell asleep with tears in her eyes, clinging to the hope that somehow, in some way, a miracle would come.